So thank you very much for coming today. This is truly a pleasure. As you just heard, I think I have fallen in love with Kyoto. It's my first time in Kyoto, and it's been absolutely fantastic so far, and I think will continue to be even more fantastic going forward. I would also like to thank, very specifically, Director Iyoshi for inviting me, because this really is a pleasure. And indeed, the fact that Kyoto University has a center for the promotion of excellence in higher education and has had that for 20 years, I think speaks to just how dedicated this university is to teaching and learning and to the continuing improvement of teaching and learning, which is such a critical part of the mission of any university. But clearly in Kyoto, it is a particularly important part of the mission. So what I would like to do this afternoon is spend some time with you sharing what the experience has been at Harvard in terms of engaging with MOOCs, the development of MOOCs, but in particular, how has this become an opportunity for the university to really push the envelope and improve how teaching and learning develops at the university. So I'll give you some examples and show you some of the important connections that has really allowed this to happen. So that one thing that's quite clear is that we're now at a moment where the world is being brought together far more closely by the ability to share content from one university with learners from all over the world. That this has changed the audience for virtually every university in the world. And for example, for a university like Kyoto, like Harvard, it's an opportunity for us to reach many more students than we could have ever reached in the past. But what is also true is that this is an opportunity for us to reconsider how is teaching and learning supported, how is teaching and learning promoted at the university itself. So as a biologist, I tend to think of things in biological terms. And in the same way that now the world is much smaller, thanks to MOOCs, we also need to think of the world of learning at each of our institutions. So that ultimately, every institution has an ecosystem for learning, where there are very specific components or species that work together, that collaborate sort of together, that really allow the entire ecosystem to evolve, to improve over time. At Harvard, this is not a tradition that has a very long period of time. Harvard is what's called a highly decentralized sort of institution. And because of our age, each school, each office, each unit tends to be very independent. And I'll be frank, I'll be honest, in the past, the tendency has been for each unit to do exactly what it wants and to not think that much about what other units are doing. But what was absolutely clear when the MOOC revolution began was that this was an opportunity to connect several critical units at Harvard, all focused on the development of online learning content. So what I'll do today is to talk about two major components that are deeply connected in this effort. One is the Derek Bok Center for Teaching and Learning, which this year is the 40th birthday of the Derek Bok Center. And this is a center very much focused on supporting faculty, on supporting graduate students in their teaching. And the other critical component that I'll talk about today is HarvardX, and how those two really came together in a very effective way, especially around getting faculty and professors excited about doing new things, but also supporting the process of producing MOOC content, online learning experiences. So that the MOOC is, of course, partly what we're here to really talk about today, the massive open online course. And as you know, MOOCs continue to be in the press to a really significant degree. And with almost every university you can think of, there are discussions of what the impact of this might be on almost every part of the university. And more largely, in terms of higher education, what does this mean for the experience of our students here on campus with us, but also the opportunities for learners around the world that might not have had access to really high quality online content. So when When, for example, the conversations really started in 2010, 2011, one of the major points that was made was that the MOOC would be a disruption of higher education, that this would change forever universities like Harvard and Kyoto, and what we did, how we thought about things. And when people talked about disruption, the question that was raised was, will there even be a Harvard or a Kyoto in the future? That maybe everything would be online. And that question is still being asked. Another way to think about this was whether or not it's an inflection, at the very least. In other words, is this a change in direction, a change in focus, a change in emphasis for universities like Kyoto and Harvard? But for us, the way in which we think about it is not so much in terms of disruption, it's not so much in terms of an inflection, but it's really an opportunity for transformation. This is a moment in time where institutions like ours need to ask the difficult question. In light of technology, in light of the internet, do we keep doing things the same way? Or do we transform ourselves and change how we teach in ways that make us not obsolete, but more valuable than ever before? How do we do that? Harvard is absolutely committed to this principle. This is not a disruption of Harvard. It will be, and already has been, a transformation of how we think about teaching and learning at Harvard. So what I will do is talk a little bit historically of how this really got started, why Harvard got so engaged with this, and the process for us really began in 2011 going into 2012 with conversations with our partner down the street, MIT, the Massachusetts Institute for Technology. And in May of 2012, Harvard and MIT got together and announced the partnership known as edX. Prior to the announcement of edX, where this came from at Harvard was that a committee of faculty drawn from all of Harvard schools, a committee called the Committee on the Year 400, the 400th anniversary. It was a committee that was called together to debate, when Harvard turns 400, what should we look like? Right? In several decades, when we turn 400, what should we look like? And that committee realized that the opportunity of the internet and technology was something that we must address and we must use. And so from those conversations, when the opportunity to partner with MIT came about, it was the perfect time for us to commit to this kind of principle of online learning. So with edX, from the very beginning, there was a commitment that it is a not-for-profit effort. There are MOOC providers that are for-profit efforts. We were committed to the notion of access for free, at least for a significant amount of the material, so that it is not-for-profit. It is open source, so that the software would continue to evolve based on open source contributions, and that Open edX, as it's called, would be available to the world. It was an opportunity to lift global learning all around the world, to improve access to high quality content. Very importantly, it should be informed by research. Because as I'm sure you have heard from your Teaching and Learning Center, for far too long, teaching and learning has been sort of an effort where an individual professor will think, this is how I want to do something, so it must be good, right? While as we know in research, everything is based on evidence. And there is now the increasing realization that teaching and learning improves based on evidence, and likewise, what we do in online learning must be improved based on evidence. It is inclusive of other universities and institutions, hence the formation of the edX Consortium. And even though it is not for profit, there is a commitment to it being financially sustainable. Like any not-for-profit organization, it must sustain itself financially eventually, or else it will not continue into the future. So a simple way of thinking of edX is that it is ultimately a software platform. It's a software platform for schools to mount their online courses, their online learning experiences. But just as importantly as the platform, edX is also a consortium. It is a group of institutions that have come together with a common commitment to quality, the importance of access, and the importance of research. So now there are many institutions around the world that have joined the consortium, and we're thrilled that both Harvard and Kyoto are members of the edX consortium. And this gives us an opportunity to share and learn from each other and work together to really have the maximal positive impact. But so this is what edX represents. But then what is HarvardX? So each institution that joined the edX consortium has a University X at their home institution. So there's Kyoto UX, HarvardX, MITx, for example. So in the very beginning, the conception of HarvardX was that it was everything at Harvard, the content we developed, the faculty that taught that content, the pedagogy, the technology that we built to contribute to the edX platform, and the research, design, and data, everything that was designed for mounting on edX, what was made at Harvard was HarvardX. That was the institutional organization. But that has changed. What we realized is that the creation of HarvardX triggered so much interest at the university, so much interest from faculty. It became such a source of conversation and debate that we realized that HarvardX itself is in fact more of a university-wide strategic initiative focused on using technology and online learning to transform education. So that what HarvardX now represents is a much larger umbrella, of which edX is one of our crucial, most important channels, but there are multiple channels, including channels which are on campus in terms of working with our own students as well. So that one way of thinking about it is that everything that HarvardX does around the creation and the research on online learning, these channels include the open courses, which we mount on edX. It also includes our School of Continuing Education, which focuses on, for example, executive education, professional education, the lifelong learning, as they call it, market. And it also includes all of the courses that we have on campus. So that very quickly, instead of having HarvardX simply focus on the world, as if that's not large enough, HarvardX also focuses on different audiences, including our own students, as well as audiences that would fall into the professional education, for example, in medicine, in business, etc., the so-called continuing education audience. And so it rapidly became clear that we were a much larger kind of strategic initiative. Because in the beginning, so I became the faculty director of HarvardX at the very beginning, and I remember the question was, if we build it, will they come? Will anyone be interested? Will the faculty be interested at all? And what we discovered is that the way we approached faculty changed their view of what online learning could be. And now HarvardX's biggest problem is that we have too many faculty that want to do something in comparison to the capacity that we have to meet their needs. So in the beginning, the idea was that HarvardX might be drawn from staff from multiple organizations at Harvard, and that it wouldn't be its own thing. We quickly realized 3 to 4 months in that we had to stand up our own organization. So that, for example, as of today, HarvardX has on the order of over 50 full-time employees with a surrounding group of about 100 to 150 part-time employees that work with us. We have now mounted 60 courses online. We have worked with over 100 faculty, and right now we're working actively on 63 courses and modules that are currently in development. And we still cannot meet the desire of our faculty to do things. So, the MOOC is how HarvardX began. The massive, the open, the online course. By the second month of HarvardX, we discovered that it does not have to be massive. That in fact, you can implement your learning experiences for your own students or for a very small cohort. So our first course from the law school on copyright law was focused on 500 students. Why just 500? Why so selfish? Because the pedagogy of the course was that Terry Fisher, the professor, wanted a learning experience in copyright where every group of students had an artist, a writer, a lawyer, a physician, a scientist, so that he could internationally bring together specific cohorts. And based on his pedagogy, we could only do it initially for 500. We now have it scaled up to 3,000, but 500 was how we started it. So it did not have to be massive. What we also realized, based on the copyright experience, it doesn't have to be open. There may be pedagogical reasons that it should be restricted to a particular group of students. Ultimately, for financial sustainability, there may be financial reasons why you want to have a special section that's restricted, that might have some form of credit, that would have cost associated with it. So it doesn't have to be open. And what we also quickly realized is that when you think about what learners need in the world, it also doesn't have to be a course. A course at Harvard is 12 to 14 weeks long. There are very few people that have a career that can spend 14 weeks focused on a course every single week. So what are we left with is the O. And since Oprah Winfrey already took the O, we can't call it the O. So what we realized is that the emphasis remains online. The emphasis, of course, is on learning. And right now in HarvardX, we focus on so-called online learning experiences. They don't have to be courses. It's a principle of what we call modularity, that shorter experiences are in fact more effective for many learners in the world, and that even our courses are developed in modules. So they are released in short pieces. It has a huge number of benefits. First of all, for faculty, it's much easier to do a short module of maybe the equivalent of 3 to 6 weeks. But for the learner, it allows you to mix and match the modules that interest you, and it allows you to ultimately, in the future, have an experience that's more tailored to specifically your needs and your interests. So HarvardX is very much focused on a very flexible image or model of an online learning experience. So that we feel this is a very important way to help expand access to education worldwide. What the world needs aren't necessarily courses, they're online learning experiences of variable length. From the very beginning, we were committed that this would enhance teaching and learning, not just online, but also on campus. Hence the decision, for example, to connect the Derek Bok Center for Teaching and Learning and HarvardX at the head, so that I head both of those organizations, but also to advance teaching and learning through research, so that through what we learn from the research we do online, not only do we understand learning online better, but we also understand how we can teach our students on campus better. And if time allows, I'll give you some examples of what that means. So now, almost 2.5 years later, Without question, HarvardX has been a convening opportunity for the university. This has been a catalyst for bringing together faculty to discuss teaching and learning like I've never seen before. I've been at Harvard for almost 25 years, and I've never seen this many faculty come together to discuss teaching and learning. HarvardX is representative of all of Harvard schools. So it's not just the arts and sciences, it's the law school, the medical school, the business school, the School of Public Health, the School of Design, the School of Government. All 12 Harvard schools are represented on HarvardX. And there is an emphasis with the guidance of all the schools on what we define as quality. It must be Harvard quality if it has the Harvard name on it. It must have some innovation in the pedagogy, in the content that is worthwhile, and we feel it must have a significant impact, be it on campus or at specific audiences around the world. So there's a faculty committee of 25 faculty, which I chair, drawn from all of Harvard schools, that looks at every proposal from a faculty member and makes the decision on whether or not it's appropriate for HarvardX. So that one thing we've realized is that even where you teach and how you express the learning online does not have to be in the classroom. So here we see Lisa New, and her MOOC is focused on poetry, on American poetry. And what she's doing here is that we captured her teaching in a park in Boston that has historical significance for American poetry and the particular poem that she was talking about. So that what you can see is that we capture learning in almost every conceivable setting, from sort of talking with the instructor directly, face-to-face, discussion in the classroom, poetry readings with famous individuals in the US, so that ultimately the video itself is extremely varied and really serves to give, there's Lisa in Walden Pond, serves to give a feeling and a context for the learning that's much richer than what you might see in the classroom. Sort of another principle was to utilize particular resources, physical resources that are at Harvard, and to share them with the world. So for example, this is a very large project called The Book, and Harvard has in America one of the best collections of medieval manuscripts.
Another scroll that we might put in the portable category is this one over here. It's not really clear which of the four categories, if any, this one should go in, but it's an interesting scroll. This is a scroll that talks about pilgrimage. We talk about it in some detail in one of our units. Has a picture of a Dominican monk arriving by ship at the Holy Land. And this whole thing is a description of a pilgrimage through the Holy Land with red crosses in places where you can get an indulgence.
So how do you do visual learning?
That text
using video
here, and
to
then
emphasize
there's another
key
text
aspects
that talks about other places around the Mediterranean world where there are the relics of saints and other kinds of holy.
So what this allows us to do is to use the medieval manuscript collection to show it as part of the learning experience and to share something that is a particular physical resource that's very special at the university. But one thing we want to do is to drive more interactivity in terms of the learning experience. So in terms of working with a medieval manuscript, traditionally, Harvard has a viewing software that looks something like this, a lot of information on the manuscript, and then you see a small image of a particular page of the medieval manuscript. What HarvardX did was, in partnership with the Mellon Foundation and with Stanford, we built and enhanced a particular open source piece of software for use on the edX platform, a new kind of viewer. So this is how, for example, this medieval book would look in our traditional system. So you can only look at it page by page by page, and here you see that's how big it can get. But in Mirador, You can see everything at once, pick one page, and then look at the power of zoom that you can have to read every bit of marginalia that might be of interest to you. If you're looking at a 36-foot or a 3-meter, 10-meter scroll, traditionally you would have to cut the scroll up into sections. You would see it section by section. In the new viewer that we built for edX, that's more than 10 meters long, and you can zoom on any part that you want and scroll literally for 10 meters. You can highlight any section you want, and students can annotate, make comments on any part of the scroll. With the same viewer, we can take an object, you can turn it to look at every view, but you can also zoom in at incredibly high resolution. For some medieval books, it's very important to be able to see both pages. And so once again, with this viewer, you're able to do that. So you can literally interact with the object and annotate it much more powerfully than ever before. So this is in Jeffrey Hamburger's course on medieval manuscripts. It embeds seamlessly into the edX platform, and it allows you to assign things to your students, and they can annotate, comment on, share it with each other, and share it with you. In terms of interactivity, we also wanted to change how do you interact with the content. Must you follow everything in a linear fashion? And the answer is no. So with our Neurobiology of Behavior MOOC, which is still being made in sections, the idea was to have sort of a recommended path through these clusters of content, but within each one, you can explore it in any way that you want, as long as you get to a certain point, and then you can move on to the next one. What this professor, David Cox, who's in my department, wanted to do as well was to change how interactivity works. He wanted to create the online experience of sitting with him at a table and having an exchange with him. So let's hear from David, how he thought about it.
We're excited to show you some of what you'll see when you take MCB80X, the new neuroscience course from HarvardX. We're aiming to change the way you think about massive open online courses. In MCB80X, we're piloting a new mode of online student interaction that we call guided interactivity. The problem with watching lecture videos online is that the interaction is fundamentally unidirectional and largely passive. In MCB80X, we want to reframe the student-teacher interaction using the technology of the internet. Now, instead of me just lecturing at you, we'll have a one-on-one discussion, and we'll invite you to interact and engage with rich simulations and interactive tools, seamlessly woven into the flow of the lecture. Together, we'll build up a neuron piece by piece, and you'll be in the driver's seat, guiding your learning according to your own needs. In the course of our discussion, we'll invite you to make hypotheses about what you'll see, and then we'll give you the tools that you need to test those hypotheses. Oscilloscopes, stimulators, patch clamp amplifiers. You'll probe the inner workings of the neuron, like a scientist would. Your responses will drive your learning experience in different directions. A kind of choose-your-own-adventure lecture that dynamically adapts to your needs.
So this gives us an opportunity to also do research on how students interact with the material and how learning is supported. We also are working on different modes of visualization. For example, when you think about visualizing a process in biology, like a nerve cell, you tend to think of either microscopy or a very sophisticated kind of animation, like Avatar. But what we realized is that you can also use claymation that allows you to give a much more three-dimensional sense, for example, of neurons and how they connect with each other. So that's made from clay. But it also allows you to be humorous. So the idea is, how does the injection of humor into what we do in terms of the learning experience actually help students keep their attention on it and help them focus and understand the concepts more effectively? So that these are just some examples of the kinds of explorations that we're doing in HarvardX. But an important thing to realize is that many of those explorations, if not all of them, are also done in collaboration with the Derek Bach Center for Teaching and Learning, so that it's a way of linking up everything you do online with what you do on campus. So that when you think about sort of a teaching and learning center, the Bach Center has a long tradition of a particular focus on translating and disseminating best practice in teaching and learning on campus to faculty and graduate students. But the partnership with HarvardX is now allowing us to do something else as well, which is to focus as well on experimentation and innovation. So that now the Bach Center has a critical commitment to faculty that want to do entirely new things. So it's not just professors that need help with their teaching. It's professors that have an exciting new idea that they want to test out. The Bach Center is now a place that they can do that. So that when a discovery is made in teaching and learning in the Bach Center, we can circulate it and translate it into best practice on campus. But very importantly, we can now evaluate how effective it is using different learner populations, using different student audiences. And what we learned from that allows us to continue to enhance the innovation and the experimentation. So that the Bach Center now has a virtuous cycle that allows us to take things from HarvardX, but to also contribute things to HarvardX. So they're very intimately linked, one with the other. So that over the past year, the Bach Center has reorganized itself around 4 areas of focus, 4 foci. One is multimedia, literacy and visualization. Another is science and learning. How do we teach science more effectively? But also, how do we contribute to the science of learning? What we understand cognitively in terms of what best supports learning. What we're calling professional and scholarly development, we now have a much expanded commitment to training our graduate students for the new world involving technology and the internet that's now out there. And believe me, our graduate students are very passionate and eager for this. And finally, educational research and assessment. It's no longer enough to think that something's a good idea, therefore it's good. We have to know that something is good based on evidence. So that this allows us now to really explore how do we work with faculty. And so Sue Goldie is a professor at the School of Public Health at Harvard. And what she's interested in doing is, how do we do a new version of what we sometimes call the Khan Academy approach? So in the Khan Academy, you just see text and diagrams being drawn out, but there's no person there. All you hear is a voice. But we have preliminary research that shows that having some connection with the person is important. Helps you pay attention, helps you feel motivated. So Sue was interested, because she draws a lot when she teaches, on how do I bring that to a different online experience. So this shows Sue working with the Bach Center, developing a new style of doing drawing for a MOOC. It's using paper.
And I like to have people warm up to this idea by thinking about the level at which it acts. So if you just think of getting up in the morning where you're alone in your room, there are all the things about you as an individual, your behaviors, your beliefs. So think of family and the people you live with, and that's a level.
Put down your hands, 'cause I see you.
So working on something for HarvardX is a lot of hard work. And so as you can see, faculty get support that's almost emotional, as well as intellectual. So that what we've learned is that faculty now, in their teaching and learning, it's no longer just a solitary activity where it's just you by yourself with your notes and your books, etc. It's now more an activity that's part of a community. So that ultimately, student collaborators are an incredibly important part of what the Bach Center does and what Harvard X does. We tend to think of students as the recipients of what we do, when ultimately one of the best ways to learn is to teach. So we now have graduate students and undergraduates involved in virtually every project. So there's a project called, for example, the Digital Problem Solving Initiative, where faculty and students get together to create better assignments, better exams, better problems. So that in this case, we hold at the Bach Center these big work sessions where a mixture of students and faculty come together. So that's a graduate student. Lisa's a graduate student. But we also have the dean of the Harvard Law School who's teaching a course. That's a faculty member from the Graduate School of Design. And they're all working together, developing and critiquing assignments. So that this is a way of creating this community that's not just faculty, but also students when it comes to developing learning content. This same structure is exactly what we do in Harvard X, and what Harvard X taught us is that now, today, creating learning experience involves not just yourself and maybe student collaborators, it involves media specialists, it involves instructional designers, it involves researchers, educational researchers, and it involves technologists. So that now it's a community of content development that is so characteristic of the best sort of learning and curricular developments that we do. So that what does this mean for the university, ultimately? Well, it completely changes how learning is supported at the university. So that now a professor can come to the Bach Center and to Harvard X to really develop new things. It's not simply about learning, it's not simply about solving a problem with their teaching, it's about pushing the envelope, discovery. So it's quite interesting that universities like Harvard and Kyoto have for decades upon decades built research centers in engineering, in the arts, in stem cell biology, focused on discovery. But quite often, teaching and learning has been historically focused on training and fixing. Now, the combination of the Bach Center and Harvard X is in effect designed to create that discovery space for faculty to come and innovate in teaching and learning. So that for the university, this has changed our view of how teaching and learning is now a critical part of scholarly discovery and research, like any other field you can think of. But what this has also done is change how we think about the role of the university in the landscape of knowledge, if you will. Because if you think about the traditional role of a university like Harvard or Kyoto, how do we have impact on the world? What do we contribute out to the world? Of course, critically, we contribute scholarship and research to the world. And we contribute our students to the world as well. But now with efforts like Kyoto UX, like Harvard X, the university can contribute knowledge directly to the world like it never has before. So that now universities can work with high schools and younger to help develop content, to improve education at earlier stages. And Harvard X has partnered with several high schools to take HarvardX content, to adapt it and use it in high schools. We can change how we interact with cities and communities. Cities care urgently about the professional development and training opportunities for the population. Now universities can contribute more directly than ever before. So Harvard is working with the city of Boston to create a new version of a community center that in part is driven by MOOC content for the population in general. And the government of Mexico is looking at the model that we have created in Boston and is thinking of doing it, for example, in several parts of Mexico as well. And the government of Saudi Arabia is also interested in this concept so that one can work with governmental priorities. So that when the government of Brazil is thinking about how do we train high school teachers to teach science better, now there's the possibility of using online content developed at the university to help meet that need. We can also work with public media. So for example, we're working now with television stations, because once you have high quality material, you can use high quality educational material on television. You can use it in film. What about publishing? Textbook publishers are also interested in working with us so that their content can enhance what we do and our content can enhance what they do. And of course, there's the universe of private enterprise. How does a company that wants to change its direction train its workforce most effectively? How do you do that? Once again, now a university like Kyoto or Harvard can contribute directly to this process. So another, I think, important realization we made is that once you create high quality and evidence-based, effective educational content, now it's no longer just the impact of your research and scholarship. It's no longer just the impact of your students. The university itself can directly plug into the world, into a network of knowledge across cities, governments, publishing, media, private enterprise, like we never have been able to before. So this, I would argue, is the evolution of the university. So that when a student comes to Harvard, when a student comes to Kyoto, they should come to an institution where their learning experience brings together the very best that technology and the internet has to offer, combined with the very best that I'm sitting in a room with a professor has to offer, that working in a lab has to offer, that going to a library has to offer. How do you combine those things to really transform and create the best learning experience possible? And then ultimately, in exploring that, how does the university now become so much more powerful in the knowledge landscape of the world? So you remember at the beginning, there was that note about disruption. Will Harvard still be here? Will Kyoto still be here? Harvard has invested in the model that, if done right, universities like ours will be more important than ever. Knowledge is the future, ultimately, and our role in creating knowledge and distributing knowledge is more important than ever, not less important. And so this is sort of a moment in time where institutions need to evolve. And those that don't embrace this, in my view, those are the institutions that are at risk of being disrupted. But I know that Kyoto is not one of them, because you have embraced what this opportunity might be. So I think I have like 10 minutes left or so. So I'd love to take any questions or comments that you might have. Thank you very much for listening.